Mocked as the plain sister, she was sent to the Duke, yet in her he found the love time had stolen. The laughter was still echoing in the grand ballroom when Marian Locksley retreated to the shadows. Her sister's engagement ball transformed Locksley Manor into a brilliant spectacle of light and music, but she remained in darkness, clutching her simple dance card, empty save for the obligatory opening dance with her father. Through lowered lashes she observed her sisters, Emmeline and Georgiana, the jewels of county society, their golden curls bouncing as they swept across the polished floor with one eligible gentleman after another. "Poor plain Marian," she heard Lady Wickham whisper behind her fan. "The Locksley burden. What shall they do with her now that the pretty ones are spoken for?" The words stung, though she had grown accustomed to them over the years. At 24, she was the eldest and least remarkable of the Locksley daughters. Neither beautiful like Emmeline nor charming like Georgiana, she was simply Marian. Brown hair that refused to hold a curl, grey eyes too large for her face, and a quiet disposition that rendered her invisible in crowded rooms. "She hasn't even the decency to be accomplished," continued Lady Wickham, unaware that Marian could hear every word. "Cannot sing, plays the pianoforte with mechanical precision rather than feeling, and I'm told her watercolours are utterly forgettable." Marian tightened her grip on her dance card, the lilac ribbon around her wrist, her mother's last gift, her only adornment worth noticing. She slipped toward the balcony doors, seeking refuge in the cool night air, when her stepmother's voice cut through the room like steel. "Marian, come here at once." Lady Locksley, resplendent in burgundy silk, beckoned imperiously. Beside her stood Lord Locksley, his face grave beneath forced civility, and a stranger whose presence commanded the attention of everyone nearby. Marian approached with hesitant steps, noting how the crowd parted for her not out of respect but curiosity. "Your Grace," her stepmother purred, "may I present my eldest stepdaughter, Miss Marian Locksley?" Marian cursed, keeping her eyes lowered as decorum demanded. Only when the silence stretched uncomfortably did she glance up, meeting the gaze of the Duke of Arundel. Alaric Vale, the most formidable bachelor in 3 counties, regarded her with cool assessment. His angular features betrayed no emotion. His eyes, a striking blue-grey, lingered on her face for a moment, before moving away, as if finding nothing worth remembering. "Miss Locksley," he said, his voice deep and formal, "I trust you are enjoying the festivities." "Indeed, Your Grace." The lie came easily, a practiced response. "My daughter is most accomplished in household management," her father interjected hastily. "Though quiet by nature, she possesses a sensible mind and practical disposition." Marian recognized the words for what they were, not praise but an advertisement. Her father's estate was crumbling under debt, his desperation palpable beneath his dignified exterior. "How convenient," remarked the Duke, the faintest trace of irony coloring his tone. A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby guests, quickly stifled but unmistakable. Marian felt the heat of humiliation creep up her neck. She knew what they all thought, that her father offered his plain daughter as a consolation prize, having already secured matches for his beautiful ones. "If Your Grace will excuse me," she murmured, preparing to retreat. But her stepmother's hand clamped around her wrist. "The Duke has expressed interest in touring our conservatory. Perhaps you might accompany him, Marian. Your knowledge of plants is one of your few redeeming qualities." Before she could respond, Lord Locksley nodded firmly. "An excellent suggestion. The Duke's estate at Arundel has magnificent gardens, I'm told. You might find common ground for conversation." Trapped, Marian accepted the Duke's proffered arm. His sleeve felt like cold marble beneath her fingers. As he led her away from the ballroom, the whispers followed. Surely he cannot be considering her, perhaps as a companion for his elderly aunt. Lord Locksley grows desperate indeed. The conservatory stood apart from the main house, a crystal palace filled with exotic blooms. Under normal circumstances, this sanctuary of green life and quiet solitude would have calmed Marian's spirits. Tonight, it felt like a stage upon which her inadequacies would be displayed. "Your stepmother lacks subtlety," the Duke remarked unexpectedly, releasing her arm once they were alone among the potted palms and orchids. Marian's head snapped up. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. Please, Miss Locksley, let us dispense with pretense. You were paraded before me like merchandise, and we both know it." His voice held no cruelty, only weary resignation. "I've endured 3 seasons of such maneuvers." The frankness of his statement left her momentarily speechless. Then, surprisingly, a small laugh escaped her lips, I believe, Your Grace, that makes me the least desirable merchandise in the county marketplace. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her candor. Honesty. How refreshing. If we're being honest, Your Grace, you needn't feign interest in our modest conservatory. I'm certain you've seen far grander collections at Arundel. You speak of Arundel as if familiar with it. I've read accounts in botanical journals. Your late Duchess was renowned for her collection of rare specimens, particularly the blue roses she cultivated. The Duke stiffened visibly. You are well informed. Reading is another of my few redeeming qualities, she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. A charged silence fell between them. In the distance, the orchestra began a waltz, its melody filtering through the glass walls like sunlight. The Duke moved to examine a crimson orchid, his profile sharp against the verdant backdrop. My wife died 7 years ago, he said abruptly. The roses no longer bloom. The unexpected confidence startled Marian. She approached a nearby fern, gently touching its delicate fronds. Perhaps they merely sleep, Your Grace. Some plants require particular care to flourish again. And you believe yourself knowledgeable in such resurrections, Miss Locksley. His tone held a challenge, though whether directed at her or himself, she could not tell. I know only that what appears dead may simply be dormant. She gestured to a withered stem nearly hidden among the lush greenery. This clematis seems beyond saving, yet come spring, it will likely produce the most exquisite blooms. The Duke studied her with renewed interest. You speak poetically for one reputed to be so practical. Practicality and sensitivity need not be enemies, Your Grace. Indeed, the most enduring beauty often emerges from their alliance. A muscle tensed in his jaw. You are not what I expected, Miss Locksley. I rarely am, Your Grace. It is both my burden and my liberation. Before he could respond, the conservatory door swung open. Lady Locksley entered, flanked by Marian's sisters. Emmeline, resplendent in azure silk, smiled coquettishly at the Duke, while Georgiana adjusted her golden curls with practiced nonchalance. Your Grace, Lady Locksley simpered, I feared you had become lost among our modest collection. The supper dance begins shortly, and I'm certain many young ladies eagerly await your invitation. The Duke's expression hardened into the aristocratic mask Marian had first observed. Indeed, Miss Marian Locksley has been most informative about your botanical specimens. Marian? Informative? Emmeline laughed, the sound like tinkling crystal. How dreadfully dull for you, Your Grace. Come, let me show you Father's collection of antiquities instead, far more interesting than dusty plants. Marian stepped back, assuming her familiar role as wallpaper, yet to her surprise, the Duke hesitated, his gaze lingering on her face. Actually, I find Miss Locksley's conversation most enlightening. He turned to Lady Locksley. Madam, I wonder if I might impose upon your hospitality further. I am in need of assistance at Arundel, someone with knowledge of botany and household management. Lady Locksley's eyes widened with naked ambition. Emmeline has studied the language of flowers extensively, and— I was referring to Miss Marian, interrupted the Duke smoothly. Her practical nature and understanding of dormant plants might prove invaluable. A stunned silence fell over the conservatory. Marian herself could scarcely believe what she had heard. Was this charity, pity, or something more calculated? You wish to employ my daughter? Lord Locksley had entered unnoticed, his expression a mixture of confusion and hope. Not precisely. The Duke straightened his already impeccable cravat. My aunt, the Dowager Duchess, requires a companion of sensible disposition to assist with the restoration of the Arundel gardens and certain household matters. Miss Marian seems ideally suited. Marian found her voice at last. Your Grace, It would be a temporary arrangement, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. 3 months, perhaps. Naturally, Miss Locksley would be chaperoned appropriately and compensated generously for her expertise. Lord Locksley's face brightened with poorly concealed relief. Marian understood immediately. Here was an opportunity to remove the plain daughter from society's critical gaze while securing a connection to one of England's most prestigious dukedoms. Even as a mere companion to the Duke's aunt, she would raise the family's standing. What a thoughtful offer, said Lord Locksley, already decided. Marian would be delighted to assist the Dowager Duchess. Would she? The Duke turned to Marian, one eyebrow raised in silent inquiry. She should refuse. This arrangement smacked of charity, a convenient solution for all parties except perhaps herself. Yet something in his gaze held challenge rather than pity, as if he were testing her courage rather than her compliance. Before I accept or decline, Your Grace, she said carefully, Might I know what specific tasks would be required of me? A flicker of approval crossed his features. A reasonable inquiry, Miss Locksley. My aunt requires assistance cataloguing the botanical collection my late wife assembled. Additionally, the east wing of Arundel has fallen into disrepair. Your practical mind might devise solutions for its restoration. Then I shall accept, Marian said, ignoring her stepmother's sharp intake of breath, provided the terms are suitable and my father approves. Excellent. The Duke's mouth curved in what might almost have been a smile. I shall have contracts drawn immediately. You will depart for Arundel on Tuesday next. As the Duke bowed and took his leave, Emmeline seized Marian's arm with bruising force. What have you done? She hissed. He was meant for me. Calm yourself, Lady Locksley snapped. The Duke seeks a gardener, not a wife. If anything, this arrangement removes Marian from society's prying eyes. Consider it a kindness to all of us. The words cut deeply, though Marian maintained her composure. Only when she returned to her chambers did she permit herself to examine the strange encounter. The Duke of Arundel, renowned for his coldness since his wife's death, had specifically requested her presence at his ancestral home. Not beautiful Emmeline or charming Georgiana, but plain, practical Marian. She touched the lilac ribbon at her wrist. Was this an escape or another kind of cage? Only time would tell. Arundel loomed against the late autumn sky, its ancient stone facades dappled with amber light as the afternoon sun broke through leaden clouds. The journey had been long and solitary, save for the presence of Mrs. Winters, the dour-faced chaperone hired specifically for the occasion. As the carriage wound up the final approach, Marian caught her first glimpse of the legendary gardens. Once the jewel of 3 counties, now a skeletal landscape of bare branches and untended beds. Most disagreeable weather, remarked Mrs. Winters, adjusting her shawl with gnarled fingers. I fear your sojourn here will be marked by isolation and discomfort, Miss Locksley. I find solitude refreshing rather than discomforting, Marian replied, her gaze fixed on the sprawling estate. Something about its weathered grandeur spoke to her, as if the very stones held stories she longed to uncover. The carriage halted before the main entrance, where a line of servants awaited their arrival with practiced stoicism. At their center stood a diminutive woman of advanced years, her posture still regal despite the silver cane upon which she leaned. The Dowager Duchess, whispered Mrs. Winters unnecessarily. Marian descended from the carriage, careful not to catch her modest grey travelling dress on the iron step. She approached with measured dignity, curtsying precisely as she had been instructed. Your Grace, I am Miss Marian Locksley. I thank you for welcoming me to Arundel. The Dowager Duchess of Arundel surveyed her with piercing blue eyes, the same shade as her nephew's, though hers held a sharp intelligence where his had shown only frost. So you are the botanical expert my nephew has imported, she declared, her voice surprisingly strong. You appear sensible enough, which is more than I can say for most young women of your generation. Come inside before this wretched damp seeps into our bones. Without waiting for a response, she turned and proceeded into the grand entrance hall, her cane tapping a metronomic rhythm against the marble floor. Marian followed, momentarily overwhelmed by the soaring ceiling and ancestral portraits that seemed to track her movement with painted eyes. My nephew is attending to business in London, the Dowager informed her briskly. He will return within the fortnight. Until then, you answer to me. I presume that arrangement causes you no distress. None whatsoever, Your Grace. Good. Mrs. Hemsley will show you to your quarters. Once you've refreshed yourself, join me in the East Wing Conservatory. I wish to assess your knowledge before entrusting you with my late niece's botanical legacy. The housekeeper, a stern-faced woman of middle years, led Marian through a labyrinth of corridors to a surprisingly pleasant chamber on the 2nd floor. Unlike the oppressive grandeur of the main halls, this room offered simple elegance, cream walls, mahogany furniture, and windows overlooking what must once have been a magnificent rose garden. The Duchess insisted you be given this room, Mrs. Hemsley explained, her tone suggesting she found the decision questionable. It was Her Grace's private sitting room before her passing. Marian's breath caught. The late Duchess. Surely there are more appropriate accommodations for someone of my station. Mrs. Hemsley's expression softened marginally. The Dowager believes a gardener should have a view of the gardens. I'll send a maid to assist you shortly. Left alone, Marian approached the window, tracing her fingers along the sill where another woman's hands had once rested. What manner of person had the Duke's wife been? The botanical journals described her as passionate about her gardens, but little else was known about the mysterious Duchess who had died so young. After changing into a serviceable moss-green dress, one of only 3 she had brought, Marian made her way to the East Wing Conservatory. Unlike the neglected gardens, this glass-enclosed sanctuary hummed with life. Exotic plants from distant shores filled copper planters and climbing trellises, creating a vibrant tableau against the winter landscape beyond. The Dowager Duchess sat amid this splendor like a queen, a leather-bound volume open upon her lap. Punctual as well as sensible, perhaps my nephew chose more wisely than I initially believed. Marian inclined her head respectfully. I appreciate the opportunity to assist with your collection, Your Grace. This is not my collection, the older woman corrected sharply. It belonged to my niece Elizabeth. For 7 years, it has survived on borrowed attention and fading memory. Even I, with my limited knowledge, can see it requires a dedicated hand. May I? Marian gestured toward a struggling orchid whose leaves had begun to yellow. At the dowager's nod, she examined the plant carefully. The soil is too alkaline for this particular species. With proper adjustments, it should recover its vigor by spring. You identify the problem so readily. I've studied botanical texts extensively, Your Grace, though I claim no particular genius, merely attention to detail. The dowager's eyes narrowed. Why would a young woman of your background devote herself to such obscure knowledge? Surely your mother encouraged more marriageable pursuits. My mother died when I was 12, Your Grace. The same year she gave me this. Marian touched the faded lilac ribbon at her wrist. She taught me that beauty is found in unexpected places, if one knows how to nurture it. Something unreadable crossed the dowager's features. Begin with this journal, she said, passing the leather volume. Elizabeth documented her collection meticulously. Study it tonight, and tomorrow you will start the cataloguing process. As you wish, Your Grace. And Miss Locksley. The dowager rose, leaning heavily on her cane. Do not mistake this assignment for mere charity on my nephew's part. Alaric does nothing without purpose, and seldom from kindness. The warning lingered in the air as the older woman departed, leaving Marian alone among the whispers of exotic foliage. She opened the journal with careful fingers, finding pages filled with elegant script, notes on soil composition, light requirements, seasonal variations. Between the technical observations, personal reflections emerged. The blue roses bloom again. A says they match my eyes. Perhaps vanity, but I preserve one in this journal. Marian turned the page, discovering a pressed rose petal. Its color faded to a ghostly blue-gray, the exact shade of the Duke's eyes. A strange intimacy washed over her, as if she had stumbled upon a private moment between husband and wife. She closed the journal, suddenly uncertain of her position in this household of shadows and memories. What purpose did the Duke have in bringing her to Arundel, and why place her in his dead wife's sitting room, surrounded by the botanical legacy another woman had created? Returning to her chamber, Marian found a small package on her bed, an assortment of gardening tools, each handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl. A note accompanied them, the handwriting bold and masculine. These belonged to the late Duchess. They should serve you well in your work. A.V. The Duke, despite his absence, had ensured she would use his wife's tools to resurrect his wife's garden. The gesture felt both thoughtful and unsettling, as if Marian were being fitted for a role someone else had once played. Outside her window, the winter twilight settled over Arundel's dormant gardens. Tomorrow she would begin bringing them back to life, though to what purpose and for whose pleasure remained unclear. The next fortnight passed in a rhythm of quiet industry as Marian immersed herself in the restoration of Arundel's botanical treasures. Each morning she rose at dawn to study Elizabeth's journal before beginning the day's tasks, pruning, repotting, and carefully recording the condition of each specimen. The Dowager Duchess observed her progress with critical attention, offering neither praise nor censure, merely acknowledgement of work adequately performed. It was on the 12th day, as Marian knelt among the dormant rose bushes in the garden proper, that she became aware of a presence behind her. Without turning, she knew who stood there. Something in the quality of the silence betrayed him. "Your Grace," she said, rising and brushing soil from her hands before curtsying. "Welcome back to Arundel." The Duke regarded her with that same inscrutable expression she remembered from their first meeting, though something had shifted in his countenance. Perhaps it was merely the setting, here among the sleeping garden, rather than the glittering ballroom. But he seemed less severe, his formal attire replaced by riding clothes that lent him a more human aspect. "Miss Locksley, I trust my aunt has not driven you to despair with her exacting standards. On the contrary, her Grace has been most instructive. Her knowledge of the estate's history has proved invaluable to my work." "And what work have you accomplished in my absence?" he inquired, his gaze sweeping over the garden beds, where evidence of her labor was visible in newly cleared pathways and pruned shrubs. "Primarily assessment and preparation," she replied, gesturing to the journal she had placed on a nearby stone bench. "The late Duchess's notes are remarkably detailed. With their guidance, I've begun addressing the most pressing needs of the collection." The Duke approached the bench, his gloved hand hovering over the journal without touching it. "You found Elizabeth's writings useful, then?" "Beyond measure, Your Grace. Her passion for botany equaled her expertise." Marian hesitated, then added softly, "She must have been a remarkable woman." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Marian, sensing his discomfort, redirected the conversation to safer ground. "With your permission, I would like to begin restoration of the blue roses as soon as weather permits. According to the journal, they require specific soil amendments before the spring growth begins. The blue roses are not to be touched." The command, delivered with such sudden sharpness, startled her. "As you wish, Your Grace. I merely thought—" "You were not brought here to revive that particular collection, Miss Locksley." She drew herself up with quiet dignity. "Then perhaps Your Grace might clarify why I was brought here. The Dowager Duchess suggested you had purposes beyond simple garden restoration." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Direct questioning, another refreshing quality you possess. One which often disrupts polite society, I'm afraid." "Polite society thrives on dissembling and falsehood." He moved away from the bench, pacing the gravel path with measured steps. "You were brought here because Arundel requires attention that neither I nor my aunt can provide. The estate has languished in half-life since Elizabeth's passing, and you believe I can resurrect it. I believe you understand dormancy, Miss Locksley. Your own words, as I recall." Marian felt an odd flutter beneath her ribs. He had remembered their conversation in the conservatory, remembered and considered her words with enough weight to act upon them. "I shall do my utmost to justify your faith, Your Grace. See that you do." He glanced toward the distant woods, where afternoon shadows had begun to lengthen. "I ride to the village on estate business. We shall speak again at dinner." Before she could respond, he strode away, his tall figure soon disappearing around a yew hedge. Marian released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The Duke of Arundel remained an enigma, cold yet observant, commanding yet somehow vulnerable, when Elizabeth's memory surfaced. That evening, dinner proved another form of assessment. Seated at the massive oak table with the Duke at its head and the Dowager Duchess opposite, Marian felt acutely conscious of her modest appearance and station. Her chaperone, Mrs. Winters, maintained a stone-faced silence throughout the meal, offering no buffer against the scrutiny of her hosts. "Miss Locksley has been most diligent in her cataloguing," the Dowager remarked as the second course was served. "Though I question her decision to prioritize the East Wing Conservatory over the Orangery. The tropical specimens are most vulnerable to winter conditions," Marian explained. "The Orangery's Mediterranean plants can better withstand temporary neglect." The Duke observed this exchange with apparent detachment, though Marian noticed how his attention never truly left her face. When he finally spoke, his question caught her entirely unprepared. "Do you miss your family, Miss Locksley?" She paused, fork suspended mid-air. "I correspond with them regularly, Your Grace." "That was not my question." Marian placed her fork deliberately beside her plate. "Truth rarely makes for appropriate dinner conversation, Your Grace. We are hardly slaves to propriety at Arundel," interjected the Dowager with surprising asperity. "Answer plainly or not at all, but spare us meaningless pleasantries." Thus cornered, Marian met the Duke's gaze directly. "I miss what family ought to be, rather than what mine is. Does that satisfy your curiosity, Your Grace?" A muscle tensed in his jaw. Not anger, she realized, but something more complex. "It does. Alaric has always possessed an unnerving talent for uncomfortable inquiries," the Dowager observed, signaling for her wine to be refilled. "You must forgive his lack of social grace, Miss Locksley. 7 years of isolation have dulled whatever charm he once possessed." "Aunt Helena," the Duke said warningly. The Dowager merely shrugged. "The girl isn't blind, Alaric. She can see what Arundel has become, what you have become. A mausoleum where the living walk among ghosts, too afraid to disturb their rest." The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like frost. Marian lowered her eyes, focusing on the intricate pattern of her plate, while the Duke's knuckles whitened around his wine-glass. "Perhaps," Marian ventured softly, "some ghosts should not be disturbed, but rather honored with continued life." Both veils turned to her with matching expressions of surprise. The dowager recovered first, a calculating gleam entering her eyes. "Explain yourself, child." Marian touched the lilac ribbon at her wrist. "My mother's memory lives in how I tend her favorite flowers, in the ribbon she gave me. The past needn't be entombed to be preserved. It can bloom again, differently perhaps, but no less truthfully." Silence settled over the dining room, broken only by the gentle clink of silver against china as a footman removed their plates. The Duke studied her with unsettling intensity before directing his next question to his aunt. "What do you make of Miss Locksley's progress in the conservatory?" The dowager seemed disappointed by this retreat to safer ground, but answered readily enough. "She has identified several rare specimens we thought lost. With proper care they may yet recover. And the cataloguing?" Proceeding methodically. "The girl has a systematic mind, if nothing else. I should like to review your work tomorrow, Miss Locksley," the Duke said, his gaze returning to her face. "After breakfast, if that suits." "Of course, Your Grace. I shall have my notes prepared." The remainder of dinner passed in relatively mundane conversation about estate matters. Only when they adjourned to the drawing room did the Duke approach her again, speaking in low tones, while the dowager was momentarily distracted by Mrs. Winters's faltering attempt at pianoforte. "So you spoke well at dinner," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Few would dare such honesty in this house." "I meant no disrespect, Your Grace." "None was taken. On the contrary." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. "You remind me of someone." "Your wife?" The question escaped before propriety could contain it. A shadow crossed his features. "No. Elizabeth was sunshine and laughter. You are moonlight and stillness." The unexpected poetry of his observation left her momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the dowager called for her to turn pages at the pianoforte, and the moment dissolved. That night, Marian stood at her bedroom window, gazing over the dormant gardens silvered by moonlight. The Duke's words echoed in her mind. Moonlight and stillness, not a comparison to his beloved wife, but recognition of something entirely different, something uniquely her own. For a woman who had spent her life being compared unfavorably to others, the distinction felt strangely significant. Morning brought a heavy mist that shrouded Arundel in pearlescent light. After breakfast, Marian gathered her notes and botanical sketches, then made her way to the East Wing Conservatory where the Duke awaited her. He stood before a table of orchids, examining a particularly vibrant specimen with critical attention. "Vanda coerulea," she said by way of greeting. "Native to the Khasi Hills of India. Your wife obtained it through correspondence with a botanist in Calcutta." The Duke straightened, acknowledging her presence with a slight inclination of his head. "You've been thorough in your research." The late Duchess was thorough in her documentation. I merely follow the path she laid. Marian approached, placing her notebook on a nearby table. "These are my observations and recommendations for each section of the collection. I've prioritized based on vulnerability and historical significance." He leafed through the pages with deliberate care, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Your handwriting is remarkably clear, a practical necessity when one must refer to notes while hands are occupied with soil." "Indeed." He closed the notebook. "Walk with me, Miss Locksley. I wish to show you something." Curious, she followed him through a door she had not previously noticed, narrow and partially concealed by a climbing jasmine. Beyond lay a small antechamber housing what appeared to be a workshop. Botanical illustrations covered the walls, while work tables held an array of scientific instruments, microscopes, measuring devices, and specialized pruning tools. Elizabeth's private sanctuary, the Duke explained. Only the most trusted gardeners were permitted entry. Marian stood motionless, absorbing the intimate nature of this space where the late Duchess had pursued her passion. "I am honored by your trust, Your Grace, but uncertain I deserve such privilege. You've earned it through your work these past weeks. My aunt speaks highly of your dedication, though she would rather forfeit her favorite brooch than admit as much to your face." Despite herself, Marian smiled. The Dowager Duchess is not one for effusive praise. A family trait, I'm afraid. His own mouth curved slightly, the closest approximation to a smile she had yet witnessed from him. "This room contains Elizabeth's experimental notes, crossbreeding attempts, soil chemistry, grafting techniques. I believe you will find them useful in your continued work. Your wife was not merely a collector then, but a true botanist. She was extraordinary in all things." The words emerged with quiet intensity. "Which makes what I must ask of you all the more difficult." Marian waited, sensing the weight of what would follow. In the 7th year after her passing, certain legal matters arise concerning her dowry and personal property. The terms of our marriage contract stipulated that if no heir existed by this time, her botanical collection would revert to her family, the Harringtons. Understanding dawned. You wish me to ensure the collection is properly documented before this transfer occurs? No. His gaze hardened. I wish you to help me prevent the transfer entirely. Marian stared at him, struggling to comprehend. Prevent it? But if legal documents require— There is a clause, he interrupted, stipulating that if the collection has been irreversibly incorporated into the estate in a manner that represents significant improvement or innovation, it remains with Arundel. And you believe my work might constitute such incorporation? With the proper direction, yes. He moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a sealed document which he placed before her. This contains Elizabeth's most ambitious project, one she never completed, the creation of a true black orchid through selective breeding. Marian's botanical knowledge sparked immediate interest. Such a specimen would indeed be extraordinary, but surely her notes alone cannot— Not her notes, Miss Locksley, her living specimens. He gestured to an unmarked door at the far end of the workshop. Through there lies a separate greenhouse where her experimental plants remain under the care of Mr. Thorne, our head gardener. If you could continue her work, perhaps even achieve what she began, it would constitute precisely the innovation required by the legal clause. The request hung between them, its implications slowly crystallizing in Marian's mind. She was being asked to complete a dead woman's life's work, to immerse herself not merely in Elizabeth's garden, but in her most private ambitions. This seems a significant departure from cataloguing existing specimens, Your Grace. It is. No pretense, no apology, merely acknowledgement of the truth. May I ask why the collection must remain at Arundel? Surely your wife's family would treasure her legacy. Something dark flickered across his features. The Harringtons care nothing for the plants themselves, only their monetary value and the prestige they represent. They would sell the rarest specimens to the highest bidders and allow the remainder to perish through neglect. You speak as if from certainty. I speak from bitter experience. He turned away, his shoulders rigid beneath his impeccable coat. Elizabeth's father made no secret of his disdain for her dirt-digging hobby, as he called it. He permitted her to bring her collection to Arundel only because I agreed to financially advantageous terms in our marriage contract. Terms that now threaten what she built, Marian murmured, understanding dawning. Precisely. She approached the sealed document with cautious fingers. And if I were to agree to this undertaking, what would be expected of me? Complete dedication to the project for the remaining 3 months of your stay. You would work primarily with Mr. Thorne, who assisted Elizabeth directly. All other duties would be secondary to this endeavour. And the Dowager Duchess, does she approve? My aunt understands the necessity, though she considers the entire affair distasteful. Legal manoeuvring, she calls it. Marian considered carefully before responding. This was no longer the simple position she had accepted, companion and cataloguer. This was a request to enter fully into the shadow of a beloved wife, to attempt completion of her unfulfilled dream. Before I decide, Your Grace, I must see these experimental specimens for myself. He nodded once, then moved to unlock the unmarked door. Beyond lay a small but exquisite greenhouse, its glass walls fogged with humidity. Inside, orchids of unusual coloration grew in specialized containers, deep purples so dark they appeared almost black, midnight blues with black veining, burgundies of such depth they swallowed light. Elizabeth's dark garden, the Duke said softly, her final project. An elderly man emerged from between the plants, his weathered face brightening at the sight of the Duke. Your Grace, I wasn't expecting you this morning. Mr. Thorne, may I present Miss Marian Locksley? She is considering assuming direction of the Black Orchid project. The head gardener assessed Marian with sharp eyes. Does she have the necessary expertise, Your Grace? This is delicate work. Miss Locksley has proven herself both knowledgeable and methodical, the Duke replied. But she has not yet agreed to the undertaking. Mr. Thorne approached Marian with undisguised skepticism. What do you know of orchid hybridization, Miss Locksley? I understand the principles, though I have limited practical experience, she admitted candidly. However, I learn quickly and follow instructions precisely. The old gardener grunted. At least you're honest. The late Duchess valued that above all else. He gestured to a nearby specimen with unusually structured petals. What do you make of this one? Marian examined it carefully. Paphiopedilum, if I'm not mistaken. The coloration is extraordinary, almost aubergine. Is it a hybrid? Very good, Mr. Thorne acknowledged, his tone marginally warmer. Her Grace crossed it with a rare Indonesian variety. 3 generations of selective breeding to achieve this depth of color. And how many more generations might be required to reach true black? That's what we're trying to determine, the Duke interjected. Elizabeth believed it might be achieved within 2 more breeding cycles. Marian circled the greenhouse slowly, absorbing the magnitude of the project before her. Each plant represented years of meticulous work, each crossbreeding a step toward an elusive goal. To assume responsibility for such a legacy was daunting, perhaps even presumptuous, and yet something in this quiet sanctuary called to her. Here was work of genuine significance, not the meaningless social performances that had defined her existence at Locksley Manor. Here, her practical mind and steady hands might serve a purpose beyond mere ornamental display. "If I were to undertake this project," she said at last, "I would require complete access to all of Elizabeth's notes, not merely those pertaining to the orchids." The Duke's expression tightened. "Some of her journals are of a personal nature. I understand, Your Grace, and I would respect all appropriate boundaries. But to truly comprehend her scientific approach, I must understand her thinking in its entirety." A tense silence followed. Mr. Thorne glanced between them, then quietly excused himself, recognizing the private nature of their negotiation. Finally, the Duke spoke. "You shall have access to her botanical journals. The personal diaries remain private." "That is acceptable." Marian drew a steadying breath. "I shall do my utmost to continue your wife's work, Your Grace. Though I cannot promise success within 3 months, I ask only for your best effort." He extended his hand, an unusually informal gesture that emphasized the gravity of their agreement. "Do we have an accord, Miss Locksley?" She placed her gloved hand in his, feeling the strength of his grip even through the fabric that separated them. "We do, Your Grace." As their hands parted, Marian could not help but wonder what unseen forces she had set in motion. In accepting this task, she stepped fully into the shadow of Elizabeth Vale, beloved wife, brilliant botanist, and the woman whose absence still haunted Arundale's halls. That evening, a package arrived in her chamber, a stack of leather-bound journals tied with blue ribbon, accompanied by a brief note in the Duke's bold handwriting. "Elizabeth's botanical legacy is now in your hands. Guard it well, A.V." Marian untied the ribbon with reverent fingers, opening the topmost journal to find pages of detailed observations, elegant sketches, and scientific notations. Between these technical entries, personal remarks appeared occasionally, glimpses of the woman behind the science. "A brought alpine gentians today, carried all the way from Switzerland. He remembers everything I mention, though he pretends indifference. How different from the coldness the world perceives in him." She closed the journal quickly, feeling like an intruder in a private moment. Yet such insights might prove essential to understanding Elizabeth's scientific methodology. The line between personal and professional seemed blurred in these pages, just as it had been in the Duchess's life. From her window, Marian glimpsed a solitary figure walking the frost-covered gardens. The Duke, his breath visible in the cold night air, as he moved among the dormant roses his wife had once tended. In the moonlight, his isolation seemed absolute, a man suspended between memory and life. The weeks that followed saw Marian's transformation from cataloguer to botanical researcher. She rose before dawn each morning, spending hours in Elizabeth's experimental greenhouse with Mr. Thorne, absorbing his practical knowledge, while applying her own methodical approach to the Black Orchid project. Afternoons were devoted to studying the late Duchess's journals, tracing the evolution of her hybridization techniques, and carefully charting possible paths forward. The Duke maintained a careful distance, appearing periodically to review her progress, but never lingering long enough for conversation beyond the strictly necessary. It was the Dowager Duchess who proved the more constant presence, observing Marian's work with increasing interest. "How you have changed since your arrival," the Dowager remarked one afternoon, finding Marian bent over a microscope in Elizabeth's workshop. "Less hesitant, more purposeful." Marian looked up, momentarily disoriented by the interruption. "The work demands certainty, Your Grace. Plants respond to confident handling, as do people." The older woman settled into a chair, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. "You've begun to earn Mr. Thorne's respect. No small accomplishment. He guarded Elizabeth's work like a dragon with treasure." "He loved her," Marian said simply. "Not romantically, of course, but as one might love a brilliant pupil who surpasses the teacher." "And my nephew?" What do you make of his interest in this project? The question held subtle danger. Marian chose her words with care. His Grace wishes to preserve his wife's legacy. I find that entirely honourable. Is that all you find it? The dowager's gaze sharpened. Come, Miss Locksley. We have progressed beyond meaningless pleasantries. Marian set down her pencil, meeting the older woman's scrutiny directly. I find it both noble and concerning, Your Grace. To preserve a legacy is admirable. To be consumed by it may prevent one from building anything new. A flicker of approval crossed the dowager's features. Precisely so. My nephew risks becoming a caretaker of memories rather than a maker of them. She rose with the assistance of her cane. The first pollination of your hybrid specimens occurs tomorrow, does it not? Yes, Mr. Thorne believes the timing optimal. Then I shall observe. 8 o'clock in the morning, I presume. Yes, Your Grace. Excellent. I shall inform Alaric as well. Marian's heart quickened unexpectedly. Is that necessary? His Grace is often occupied with estate matters in the mornings. The dowager's smile held knowing amusement. My nephew's schedule is suddenly of concern to you? How interesting. Before Marian could formulate a suitable denial, the older woman continued. This represents a significant milestone in your project. Alaric will wish to be present. That night, Marian found sleep elusive. The following day's pollination was indeed crucial, the culmination of weeks of preparation, and the first true test of her understanding of Elizabeth's methods. The Duke's presence would add a layer of scrutiny she had not anticipated. What if she faltered? What if her hands trembled at the critical moment? More troubling still was her reaction to the prospect of his attendance. The flutter beneath her ribs had become familiar whenever he entered a room, a physical awareness she dared not examine too closely. Dawn broke with perfect clarity, the February sky awash of pale blue that promised spring's eventual return. Marian dressed with particular care, selecting her most serviceable gown, a deep forest green that would not show soil or pollen stains. She secured her hair in a simple knot, donned her gardening apron, and made her way to the experimental greenhouse where Mr. Thorne already awaited. Perfect conditions, the old gardener declared, checking the temperature gauge. Humidity at optimal levels. You've studied the technique? Yes. I practiced yesterday on the control specimens. Marian arranged her tools with methodical precision. Fine brushes, collection vials, labeling materials. At precisely 8 o'clock, the door opened to admit both the Duke and his aunt. The dowager settled onto the sole chair, while the Duke positioned himself near the workbench, his tall figure casting a long shadow over the delicate plants. Miss Locksley, he acknowledged, his expression unreadable. Mr. Thorne informs me you have mastered Elizabeth's hybridization technique. I have studied it carefully, Your Grace, though mastery may be too generous a term. Proceed when ready. He gestured toward the waiting specimens, two particularly promising orchids, whose genetic characteristics, according to Elizabeth's notes, might finally achieve the elusive true black coloration. Marian drew a steadying breath, then began the delicate process. Using a magnifying glass, she identified the precise structures of the first bloom, then with exquisite care collected pollen on the tip of her finest brush. The greenhouse fell silent, save for the soft dripping of condensation from the glass ceiling. Even the dowager seemed to hold her breath as Marian transferred the precious genetic material to the waiting stigma of the second plant. Gently, murmured Mr. Thorne. Just so. Her hands remained steady, her movements precise. When the transfer was complete, she secured a small paper envelope around the pollinated bloom to protect it from contamination, then labeled it with date, parentage details, and environmental conditions. The first of 7 planned crosses, she explained, looking up to find the Duke watching her with an intensity that sent warmth creeping up her neck. Each represents a different approach to achieving the coloration Elizabeth described in her notes. How soon will results be visible, he inquired. If successful, seed pods should form within 6 to 8 weeks. Germination would follow, though full maturation requires considerably longer. Beyond the 3-month horizon of our agreement, he observed. Yes, Your Grace, I cannot promise visible results during my stay, only proper foundation for the work's continuation. The Duke's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Elizabeth understood the patient's botany demands. Some of her crosses took years to mature. Like all worthwhile endeavors, interjected the dowager, significant transformations rarely occur overnight. Something in her tone caused Marian to glance sharply at the older woman, whose shrewd eyes moved meaningfully between her nephew and the botanist. Before any response could be made, Mr. Thorne directed their attention to the next specimens awaiting pollination. The morning proceeded smoothly. each cross executed with precision and properly documented. When the final pollination was complete, Marian felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. She had performed complex botanical procedures under the scrutiny of experts and emerged unscathed. More than that, she had excelled. "Most impressive, Miss Locksley," the Duke said, examining her detailed notes. "Your methodology rivals that of trained botanists." "High praise indeed coming from you, Alaric," remarked the Dowager with barely concealed amusement. "Perhaps we might celebrate this milestone with a proper luncheon. The conservatory would provide a fitting setting." "An excellent suggestion," he agreed, surprising Marian with his ready acquiescence. "Mr. Thorne, you will join us, of course." The elderly gardener beamed with undisguised pleasure. "I would be honored, Your Grace." "Miss Locksley, you will have time to refresh yourself before noon." The Duke's question was formal, yet something in his gaze suggested personal concern for her comfort. "Yes, thank you, Your Grace." As she returned to her chamber to change, Marian caught her reflection in the mirror, cheeks flushed with accomplishment, eyes bright with intellectual engagement, a smudge of pollen dusting her forehead like a botanist's badge of honor. For perhaps the first time in her life, she looked at herself without criticism or comparison, seeing instead a woman of purpose and value. The celebratory luncheon transformed the East Wing Conservatory into a garden of delights. White-clothed tables nestled among blooming camellias, while footmen circulated with champagne and delicate savories. Marian, having changed into her second-best gown of dove-grey silk, found herself seated between Mr. Thorne and the Dowager Duchess, with the Duke directly across from her. "A toast," announced the Duke, raising his glass, "to successful pollination and the continuation of Elizabeth's vision." "And to Miss Locksley," added the Dowager boldly, "whose hands prove as steady as her intellect." Marian lowered her eyes, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "The success belongs equally to Mr. Thorne's guidance." "Nonsense," declared the elderly gardener with unexpected vehemence. "I've merely advised." "The execution has been yours entirely, Miss Locksley. Her Grace would have approved of your technique." The Duke's gaze lingered on Marian's face. Indeed she would. Conversation flowed more easily than Marian had anticipated. The Duke, normally so reserved, engaged Mr. Thorne in reminiscences about Elizabeth's early experiments, while the Dowager regaled them with tales of Alaric's childhood attempts at gardening, most ending in spectacular disaster. "He once planted an entire bed of hothouse lilies in the snow," she recalled, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "insisted they would grow if he visited them daily." "I was 7 years old, Aunt," the Duke protested, though without heat. "And if memory serves, you encouraged the experiment." A lesson in natural consequences seemed educational. The Dowager sipped her champagne with regal satisfaction. "Though I did rescue several bulbs after you admitted defeat." Marian found herself charmed by this glimpse of the Duke as a determined child, seeing in it the roots of the man's current persistence. "Did you continue your botanical interests into adulthood, Your Grace?" "Only vicariously, through Elizabeth." A shadow crossed his features, quickly mastered. "She brought the gardens to life in ways I never could." "Different talents flourish in different soils," Marian observed quietly. "What grows well in one environment may wither in another." The Duke regarded her thoughtfully. "You speak from personal experience, I think." "Perhaps." She traced the rim of her water glass. "At home I was considered superfluous. Here, my particular abilities seem better suited to the requirements." "Then Arundel has gained what Locksley Manor failed to value," he replied, his voice dropping to a register that seemed meant for her ears alone. The Dowager cleared her throat meaningfully. "The weather improves daily. Perhaps a tour of the wider estate might be arranged for Miss Locksley. She has been confined primarily to the house and immediate gardens these 7 weeks." "An excellent suggestion," the Duke agreed. "Would tomorrow afternoon suit Miss Locksley? The Western Woods contain several botanical specimens that might interest you." "That would be most pleasant, thank you." The remainder of the luncheon passed in agreeable conversation, with Marian contributing more freely than she would have dared upon her arrival at Arundel. Something had shifted, not merely in how she was perceived, but in how she perceived herself. The woman who had been dispatched as the plain sister now spoke as a respected contributor to a project of significance. The following day dawned clear and unseasonably mild. Marian chose her warmest walking dress, a serviceable navy wool, and sturdy half-boots for the promised tour. Mrs. Winters, predictably, insisted on accompanying them as propriety demanded, though she made her displeasure known through pinched expressions and audible sighs. The Duke met them at the main entrance, dressed for outdoor activity in riding boots and a well-cut coat of charcoal wool. "Ladies, I trust you find the weather amenable for our excursion." "Perfectly delightful," Marian replied, inhaling the crisp air with genuine pleasure. "One can almost sense spring's approach." "Indeed, the snowdrops have already emerged near the old abbey ruins." He offered his arm with formal courtesy. "Shall we begin? I thought we might follow the western path toward the lake." Mrs. Winters positioned herself precisely 2 steps behind them, close enough to observe all interactions, but far enough to allow conversation. The arrangement struck Marian as absurd yet necessary, a concession to social expectations that seemed increasingly irrelevant within Arundale's boundaries. As they walked, the Duke proved an unexpectedly knowledgeable guide, identifying various trees and plants with surprising accuracy. When Marian remarked upon this, he smiled faintly. Elizabeth was a thorough teacher. She insisted I learn the names of everything growing on the estate. He paused beside a stand of elegant white birches. These were her favorite trees. She claimed they reminded her of ballet dancers frozen in perpetual performance. A poetic comparison, Marian observed. She must have been quite imaginative. Extraordinarily so. His expressions softened with memory. She saw beauty in unexpected places. "Much like you, Miss Locksley." The comparison startled her. "I hardly think your work in the greenhouse," he clarified. "You've identified potential in specimens others dismissed as unpromising. Mr. Thorne mentioned your rescue of the failing Cattleya hybrid, a plant he had resigned to compost." "Oh," relief mingled with disappointment. "Yes, it merely required different conditions. Sometimes plants are misjudged because they're placed where they cannot thrive. A principle applicable beyond botany, perhaps." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than strictly proper, before he gestured toward a clearing ahead. "The lake lies just beyond those elms. The view is particularly fine this time of year." They emerged onto the shore of a substantial lake, its surface glinting like polished silver in the winter sunlight. Across the water stood a small classical temple, a folly in the Greek style, its white columns stark against the dark pines behind it. "How beautiful," Marian breathed, genuinely moved by the harmonious landscape. "Elizabeth designed this vista." The Duke's voice carried a note of pride. "The temple was my wedding gift to her, but the surrounding plantings were entirely her creation." Mrs. Winters, having fallen increasingly behind due to the exertion, finally caught up to them. "Most inconsiderate pace," she muttered, fanning herself vigorously despite the cool air. "I require rest before proceeding further." "Of course," the Duke replied smoothly. "There's a bench just there beneath the willow. Miss Locksley and I shall remain within sight while viewing the temple from the opposite angle." Before the chaperone could object, he guided Marian along the shoreline, maintaining a properly respectful distance, yet creating enough separation for private conversation. "Your chaperone finds me thoroughly objectionable," he observed, a hint of amusement lightening his usually solemn countenance. "Mrs. Winters finds all situations potentially compromising," Marian replied. "It's her primary talent." His unexpected laugh, rich and genuine, sent a curious warmth through her chest. "You surprise me, Miss Locksley. There's a vein of gentle wickedness beneath your practical exterior." "Not wickedness, Your Grace, merely observation." She smiled despite herself. "Mrs. Winters was selected by my stepmother precisely for her suspicious nature. I believe the instructions were to prevent any possibility of impropriety or enjoyment. Your family anticipated impropriety at Arundale." His tone remained light, but something in his expression had sharpened. Marian hesitated, then opted for honesty. "They anticipated nothing beyond removing me from their immediate concern. The position offered convenience for all parties. All parties save yourself, perhaps." "On the contrary," she countered quietly. "I have found unexpected satisfaction in the work here, more than I dared hope when I departed Locksley Manor." The Duke studied her face with unsettling intensity. "You speak as if you had no expectation of finding purpose or pleasure in this arrangement." "I had no expectations whatsoever, Your Grace. Experience had taught me to anticipate only tedium and obligation in any position deemed suitable for the plain sister." His brow furrowed. "That phrase, you've used it before. Is that how your family refers to you?" Marian regretted her candor immediately. "Forgive me, I spoke inappropriately." "Not inappropriately, honestly." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Does your family truly address you in such a manner?" The genuine concern in his expression loosened something within her, a knot of resignation she had carried so long she'd ceased to recognize its weight. "Not directly," she admitted, "but I have overheard it frequently enough." The plain sister, or poor Marian, or simply the eldest, with a certain inflection that conveys all that need not be spoken aloud. The Duke's jaw tightened. "And you departed Locksley Manor with these words ringing in your ears." Among other assessments of my limited prospects and general unremarkability, she attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But we all must face the truth of ourselves eventually. False comfort serves no purpose." "Truth?" He spoke the word as if it tasted bitter. "Whose truth, Miss Locksley? The assessment of those who see only surface and circumstance, or the truth of capability and character?" His vehemence startled her. "Your Grace, You have accomplished more in these 7 weeks than many would achieve in years," he continued, his voice low and intense. "You've mastered complex botanical techniques, earned the respect of my household, and brought life back to rooms long shrouded in neglect. Yet you speak as if these achievements count for nothing against the idle judgment of shallow minds." Marian stood speechless, her pulse quickening beneath the unexpected passion of his defense. "Miss Locksley!" Mrs. Winters's sharp call shattered the moment. "I must insist we return to the house at once. This dampness endangers my constitution." The Duke's expression closed like a door, his formal mask sliding seamlessly back into place. "Of course, Mrs. Winters. We shall return directly." The walk back proceeded in strained silence, with Mrs. Winters positioned determinedly between them. Only as they reached the main entrance did the Duke speak again. "Miss Locksley, would you join me in the library after dinner this evening? There are matters concerning the orchid project I wish to discuss." "Of course, Your Grace." "With a proper chaperone present, I assume," interjected Mrs. Winters acidly. "The Dowager Duchess will attend us," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. Dinner that evening proved an unusually stilted affair. The Duke appeared distracted, responding to his aunt's conversational gambits with minimal courtesy. The Dowager, sensing something amiss, directed increasingly pointed remarks his way until he finally set down his fork with barely concealed impatience. "Aunt Helena, I find myself fatigued by social niceties this evening. Pray excuse my poor company." "Fatigue, is it?" The Dowager's eyes gleamed with skepticism. "How curious, given your apparent vigor during this afternoon's extensive walk." Marian studied her plate intently, unwilling to meet either Vale's gaze. Whatever undercurrent flowed between them, she wanted no part in it, particularly with Mrs. Winters observing every exchange with hawkish attention. When the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, leaving the Duke to his solitary port, the Dowager settled beside Marian on the settee. "My nephew mentioned a library meeting after dinner," she remarked. "Something about the orchid project?" "Yes, Your Grace, though he did not specify the exact nature of the discussion." The Dowager tapped her cane thoughtfully against the Aubusson carpet. "Alaric rarely acts without purpose. I wonder what prompted this sudden consultation." Before Marian could formulate a suitably neutral response, the drawing-room door opened to admit a footman bearing a silver salver. "A letter for Miss Locksley, Your Grace," he announced, presenting the missive with formal precision. Marian accepted the envelope with surprise, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the single sheet and scanned its contents, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Unwelcome news from home?" inquired the Dowager when Marian finally looked up. "My father requests my immediate return to Locksley Manor," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. "It seems my sister Emmeline's engagement has been broken, and my presence is required to assist with household matters." Mrs. Winters perked up visibly. "How fortunate. We shall pack immediately and depart on tomorrow's mail coach." "That seems precipitous," observed the Dowager, "particularly given the importance of the botanical work currently underway." Marian reread the letter, noting the underlying urgency beneath her father's formal phrases. "I fear the situation at home may be more urgent than father wishes to state directly. Between the lines, I sense genuine distress." "Then we must consult with my nephew." The Dowager signaled to the footman. "Inform the Duke that his presence is required in the drawing-room at once." When the Duke arrived moments later, his expression tightened at the sight of the letter in Marian's hand. "What has occurred?" The Dowager explained the situation succinctly. "The question now becomes whether Miss Locksley's family obligation outweighs her professional commitment to Arundel." The Duke turned to Marian, his gaze direct. "What do you wish to do, Miss Locksley?" The question, simple yet profound in its respect for her agency, momentarily robbed her of speech. No one had ever asked what she wished in matters concerning family obligation. She hesitated, torn between duty and desire. The work here is of great importance, and at a critical juncture. Yet my family appears in genuine need. Could a compromise be reached? Suggested the Dowager. Perhaps a brief return home to assess the situation, followed by completion of your term here? Hope flickered briefly, then faded as Marian reread her father's closing lines. Your indefinite presence is required to maintain household order during this difficult period. The message was clear. Once home, she would not be permitted to leave again. I fear my father anticipates a permanent return, she admitted reluctantly. The letter implies that the situation requires ongoing attention. The Duke's expression darkened. I see. Miss Locksley will naturally honor her family's requirements, Mrs. Winters declared with poorly concealed satisfaction. Blood ties supersede all other considerations. Do they? The Duke's voice held a dangerous edge. Even when those ties bind one to circumstances of diminishment rather than growth? Shocked silence followed his challenge. The Dowager recovered first, casting her nephew a warning glance. Perhaps we might continue this discussion in the library as originally planned. Mrs. Winters, you seem fatigued by the day's exertions. May I suggest you retire? I shall personally chaperone Miss Locksley during the consultation. The chaperone bristled. My duty is clear. As is mine, interrupted the Dowager with steely finality. As mistress of this household in my nephew's unmarried state, I determine what constitutes proper supervision. You are dismissed for the evening, Mrs. Winters. Left with no graceful alternative, the chaperone withdrew, her rigid back communicating profound disapproval. In the library, the Duke paced before the fireplace, while Marian sat stiffly beside the Dowager on a leather settee. The letter lay on the mahogany table between them like a declaration of war. May I? The Duke gestured toward the missive. Marian nodded, watching his expression as he read her father's words. His jaw tightened progressively, a muscle working beneath the skin as he reached the conclusion. This letter, he said finally, contains no information about the nature of your sister's broken engagement, nor any specific duties requiring your particular skills. No, Your Grace. Yet it demands your indefinite presence for household order. Most curious. He placed the letter down with deliberate care. Miss Locksley, forgive my impertinence, but I must ask, what precisely would your role be upon return to Locksley Manor? The question pierced her with its accuracy. What indeed would she do? The answer formed with crystal clarity. She would resume her invisible existence, managing household details while her sister's dramas claimed center stage. She would retreat into the shadows of Locksley Manor, all she had learned and accomplished at Arundel, gradually fading like a dream upon waking. I would provide stability, she answered carefully. My practical nature makes me suited to maintaining order while others express stronger emotions. You would become invisible again, he stated bluntly. The quiet sister who enables others' theatrics without claiming space for her own existence. Marian flinched at the unvarnished truth of his assessment. Family duty requires sacrifice, Your Grace. Duty, yes. Self-erasure, no. He resumed pacing, hands clasped behind his back. I propose an alternative. Remain at Arundel until the initial pollination results are documented, perhaps another 6 weeks. I shall write to your father explaining the critical nature of the botanical work and the substantial compensation that will accompany its completion. Hope flickered again, stronger now. My father places great value on financial considerations. Indeed, the Duke replied dryly. I recall that from our first meeting. He paused, his expression softening as he regarded her. Beyond the practical matter of the orchid project, I would ask you to consider what you truly desire, Miss Locksley. Not what duty demands or others expect, but what you yourself wish for your life. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities neither had dared name directly. Marian felt the Dowager's shrewd gaze upon her face, assessing and knowing all at once. I shall write to father tonight, she decided finally. With your permission, I will explain the importance of completing the work here before returning home. An excellent solution, approved the Dowager. I shall add my own note, emphasizing how indispensable you have become to the household. Perhaps even suggest that your extended absence from Locksley Manor might provide your sister the necessary space to process her disappointment without distractions. A ghost of a smile touched Marian's lips at this diplomatic framing of her continued absence as a benefit rather than an inconvenience. Thank you, Your Grace. As they rose to depart, the Duke moved to open the library door, his tall figure momentarily blocking the exit. Miss Locksley, he said softly, remember that dormancy need not be permanent. Even the most neglected plants can flourish when finally placed in proper soil. The botanical metaphor carried a weight of meaning that left Marian breathless. She could form no suitable reply beyond a slight nod as she passed him, the subtle scent of sandalwood and leather briefly enveloping her as she moved into the corridor. That night, as she composed her letter home, Marian found herself writing with unexpected confidence. For the first time, she advocated for her own path rather than merely accepting the course others charted for her. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping from shadow into sunlight after a lifetime in darkness. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to Arundel. Marian had just completed her daily inspection of the pollinated orchids when Mr. Thorne appeared at the greenhouse door, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Locksley, a gentleman has arrived asking for you most insistently. The Duke is currently meeting with estate tenants, and the Dowager Duchess has instructed that you be notified immediately." Alarmed by the urgency in the old gardener's voice, Marian removed her apron and quickly tidied her appearance before following him to the main house. In the grand entrance hall stood a figure whose presence sent a chill through her core. George Locksley, her eldest stepbrother, immaculate in travelling clothes and wearing an expression of barely contained impatience. "There you are, Marian," he declared, dispensing with formal greetings. "Your belongings are to be packed immediately. We depart within the hour." Marian stared at him, momentarily speechless. Though they had grown up under the same roof, George had rarely acknowledged her existence beyond issuing occasional commands disguised as requests. His sudden appearance at Arundel and his imperious manner signaled trouble beyond what her father's letter had implied. "George," she said finally, maintaining composure with effort, "this is most unexpected. I dispatched a letter only last night explaining the importance of completing my work here before returning home." "Circumstances have changed," he replied curtly. "Father's gout has worsened considerably, and with Emmeline in constant hysterics, the household teeters on the edge of chaos. Your presence is required without delay." "I see." Marian's mind raced, calculating possibilities and consequences. "Nevertheless, I cannot simply abandon my responsibilities here without proper notice. The Duke has entrusted me with projects of significant importance." George's expression hardened. "Your first duty is to your family, sister. I find it most peculiar that you would place the interests of strangers above those of your own blood." "Not strangers," corrected the Dowager Duchess, appearing silently from the adjacent drawing-room like an avenging spirit. "Miss Locksley has become an essential member of this household, young man, and you are?" Taken aback by the regal figure before him, George performed a hasty bow. "George Locksley, your grace, eldest son and heir to Lord Locksley. I've come to escort my sister home to attend family matters of pressing importance." "Indeed." The Dowager's tone could have frosted glass. How curious that these pressing matters could not wait for a response to Miss Locksley's letter, nor for the completion of her contracted work. "Family emergencies wait for no one's convenience, madam," George replied stiffly. "True emergencies, certainly," agreed the Dowager. "Yet your sister's letter home specifically requested information about the nature of this purported crisis, suggesting alternatives that might accommodate both family needs and professional obligations." Marian watched this exchange with growing unease. Something beyond Emmeline's broken engagement and her father's gout had precipitated George's appearance. He would never have undertaken such a journey without compelling reason. "What aren't you telling me, George?" she asked directly. Her stepbrother's face flushed. "It is not a matter for public discussion." "Then perhaps we might speak privately," she suggested, gesturing toward a small anteroom off the entrance hall. The Dowager nodded approval. "I shall have refreshments brought while you confer with your brother, Miss Locksley. Take what time you require." Once alone with George, Marian faced him squarely. "Now what is the true purpose of this unexpected retrieval?" He paced the small room like a caged animal before finally spitting out the truth. "Father has arranged another match for Emmeline, to Sir William Blackwood. The wedding takes place in 3 weeks, but Emmeline refuses to cooperate. She threatens to expose her indiscretion with her previous fiancé if forced into this marriage." Understanding dawned. "And father fears scandal above all else." "Naturally." George stopped pacing to fix her with a meaningful stare. "Your role is to persuade Emmeline to behave sensibly. She has always heeded your counsel, however reluctantly. So I am to convince my sister to enter a loveless marriage to a man 3 times her age, merely to protect the family name?" The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "To secure her future, and by extension all of ours," he corrected sharply. Sir William's fortune will relieve father's financial straits and provide connections that benefit the entire family. Surely you understand what's at stake." Marian did understand, all too well. The familiar machinery of family obligation had been set in motion, with herself as the reliable cog, expected to keep everything functioning smoothly, regardless of personal cost. "And if I refuse to return immediately?" she asked, testing boundaries she would never have dared question before her time at Arundel. George's face darkened. "Then you force father to reveal certain truths about your position here. Rumors already circulating that the plain sister was sent to warm a widower's bed rather than tend his gardens. How would your precious duke react to such insinuations, besmirching his household?" The cruel threat struck with precision, leaving Marian momentarily breathless. "You would destroy my reputation to secure your aims. I would do whatever necessary to protect this family's standing," he replied without hesitation. "Now shall I instruct your chaperone to begin packing, or will you?" Trapped by familiar patterns of manipulation and threat, Marian felt the confidence she had cultivated at Arundel begin to crumble, yet something new flickered beneath the surface, a seed of resistance nurtured by weeks of being valued for her mind, rather than merely tolerated for her usefulness. "I require time to properly conclude my work here," she said finally. 1 week at minimum. The Duke must be informed personally, and arrangements made for the continuation of projects under my direction. 3 days, countered George. "No more. 5 days, she insisted, surprising them both with her firmness. "And I shall write to Emmeline directly, beginning the process of persuasion before my return. That should stabilize matters temporarily." Her stepbrother studied her with narrowed eyes, perhaps sensing the subtle change in her demeanor. After a lengthy pause, he nodded curtly. 5 days then. But I shall remain at Arundel to ensure your departure proceeds as agreed." "As you wish." Marian moved toward the door, her mind already calculating how to manage this unexpected crisis. "I shall speak with the Dowager about arranging accommodations for you." When they emerged from the anteroom, they found not only the Dowager waiting but the Duke himself, his tall figure silhouetted against the late morning light streaming through the entrance hall windows. His expression, as he observed George Locksley, contained a coldness Marian had not witnessed since her earliest days at Arundel. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying formally, "may I present my stepbrother, Mr. George Locksley. He brings news requiring my return to Locksley Manor within the week." The Duke acknowledged George with minimal courtesy, before turning his full attention to Marian. "Is this arrangement satisfactory to you, Miss Locksley?" The question, so similar to their exchange by the lake, carried the same profound respect for her agency. Yet this time the circumstances afforded her no true choice. "It is necessary, Your Grace," she replied carefully. "Family matters of some urgency require my attention." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding perhaps of all she could not say openly. "I see. Then we must ensure your work here is properly documented before your departure." He turned to his aunt. "The blue suite in the west wing should be prepared for Mr. Locksley's stay." "Already arranged," replied the Dowager smoothly, "though I wonder if Mr. Locksley might prefer the village inn. Arundel can be dreadfully quiet for young gentlemen accustomed to livelier society." George straightened his already impeccable waistcoat. "I thank you for your consideration, Your Grace, but I shall remain wherever my sister resides. Family duty, you understand." "Of course," murmured the Duke, his tone suggesting anything but understanding. "Miss Locksley, when you have settled your brother, I would appreciate your assistance in the experimental greenhouse. Several specimens require your immediate attention." "Yes, Your Grace. I shall come directly." As George was led away by a footman, the Duke lingered, waiting until they were beyond earshot before speaking softly. "Is all truly well, Miss Locksley? You seem constrained." The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her careful composure. "My family's needs must take precedence," she replied, the practiced phrase sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Must they?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. "Or is that merely what you have been taught to believe?" Before she could formulate a response, he continued with quiet intensity. "You have 5 days remaining at Arundel. Use them wisely, Miss Locksley, not merely to conclude your work, but to determine what you truly desire for your future." With that enigmatic counsel he departed, leaving Marian to contemplate choices she had never before considered possible. The following days unfolded in a blur of activity as Marian worked feverishly to document her research and prepare detailed instructions for Mr. Thorne. George's presence cast a constant shadow over her efforts, his watchful gaze monitoring her interactions with the household. Only in the experimental greenhouse did she find respite, as her stepbrother professed horror at the prospect of soiling his pristine attire among the common dirt. On the eve of her fourth day at Arundel, with departure looming just hours away, Marian worked late into the night, transcribing final notes on the pollination project. The main house had long since retired to darkness when she finally closed Elizabeth's journal, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she would likely never see the results of her careful work. "Still awake, Miss Locksley?" The Duke's voice from the workshop doorway startled her. He stood silhouetted against the dim corridor light, his formal evening attire suggesting he had only recently returned from some engagement. "Your Grace," she acknowledged, rising hastily. "I was completing my documentation for Mr. Thorne." At nearly midnight? He entered the workshop fully, closing the door behind him. In the intimate space, lit only by her single lamp, his presence seemed both imposing and oddly comforting. "Your dedication exceeds all expectation. I merely wish to ensure nothing is overlooked in the transition." She gestured to the neat stack of papers before her. "The Black Orchid project has such potential. I would not see it falter for want of proper guidance. And what of your own potential, Miss Locksley?" He moved closer, his expression grave in the lamplight. "Will that too be sacrificed for others' convenience?" The early morning mist clung to Arundel's gardens like a reluctant lover, unwilling to yield to the strengthening spring sunshine. Marian stood beside the waiting carriage, her modest travelling cloak drawn tightly against the chill as footmen secured her trunks to the roof. George had already taken his place inside, his impatience palpable even through the carriage's closed windows. "Everything is prepared for your journey," stated the Dowager Duchess, who had risen at this unconscionable hour to oversee Marian's departure, "though I maintain that this precipitous exit is entirely unnecessary." "You are most kind, Your Grace," Marian cursed, unable to fully express her gratitude for the older woman's unexpected support during these difficult days. "Your hospitality has been extraordinary." "Nonsense. You earned your place at Arundel through merit, not charity." The Dowager's shrewd eyes assessed her with the familiar, penetrating gaze. "Remember that, child, when others attempt to diminish your worth." Before Marian could respond, the main doors of the house opened to admit the Duke, his tall figure moving with purpose across the gravel drive. Though the hour was early, he appeared fully dressed for the day, his expression set in lines of grave determination. "Your Grace," Marian acknowledged, curtsying deeply, "I did not expect you to rise for my departure." "Did you not?" He raised an eyebrow, the faintest suggestion of his rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. "After all our discussions of dormancy and awakening, I would hardly remain asleep at such a pivotal moment." The cryptic statement hung between them. Laden with meanings Marian dared not interpret too freely, she settled for simple gratitude instead. "Thank you for the opportunity you provided me at Arundel. I shall always value the experience most highly." "Is experience all you take from here?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Before she could formulate a suitable response, George thrust his head from the carriage window. "We must depart immediately if we hope to reach the posting house by nightfall. The roads grow treacherous after dark." "One moment, Mr. Locksley," the Duke replied, his tone brooking no argument. "There are matters requiring conclusion between your sister and myself." To Marian's astonishment, he withdrew an envelope from his coat and presented it to her with formal courtesy. "Your final compensation, Miss Locksley, along with a letter of recommendation detailing your contributions to Arundel's botanical collection. I believe you will find both exceed initial expectations." She accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. "Your generosity overwhelms me, Your Grace." "Not generosity, recognition of value." His gaze held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "The enclosed documents also contain an offer, should you wish to consider it in the future." "An offer?" she echoed, confusion evident in her voice. "For a permanent position at Arundel," he clarified, "as Director of Botanical Research and Conservation. The salary would be substantial, the accommodations appropriate to such a senior role, and the autonomy complete in matters pertaining to your expertise." Marian stared at him in disbelief. "But that is, such a position would recognize your true worth," he finished for her, "a concept to which your family appears stubbornly blind." From the carriage, George made a sound of impatient disgust. "Sister, this grows absurd. Whatever botanical fantasies have occupied your time here must now yield to reality. Our family awaits." The Duke's jaw tightened at this interruption, but he maintained his focus on Marian's face. "The offer stands indefinitely. Whatever circumstances you encounter at Locksley Manor, know that Arundale's doors remain open to you, not as a temporary visitor, but as a valued contributor to its legacy." The significance of his offer washed over her in waves. A permanent position, independence, work of genuine meaning, the possibility of a life defined by capability rather than convenience. "I am deeply honored, Your Grace," she managed finally, tucking the envelope carefully into her reticule, "more than I can adequately express." "Your expression communicates sufficiently," he replied, the warmth in his eyes belying his formal words. The carriage driver shifted restlessly on his perch, awaiting final instruction. The moment of departure could no longer be delayed. "Farewell, Your Grace," Marian said softly, extending her gloved hand in a gesture that bridged the divide between employer and employee, yet stopped short of presuming greater intimacy. "I shall not forget my time at Arundale." To her surprise, the Duke removed his own glove before taking her hand in his. "Nor shall I forget your contribution to its renewal, Miss Locksley." His bare fingers pressed something small and firm into her palm before releasing her hand. "Safe journey." Only when seated beside her increasingly agitated stepbrother did Marian dare examine what the Duke had given her. Opening her hand, she found a small seed packet, carefully labelled in his bold handwriting. "Black Orchid, First Viable Seeds, April 1858. The experimental crossing had succeeded. Somehow, against all expectations, the seeds had formed earlier than anticipated. And the Duke had given her this precious result, the culmination of his wife's work and her own continuation, not as scientific documentation, but as a personal talisman. "What nonsense is that?" demanded George, noticing the packet as the carriage lurched into motion. "A rare botanical specimen," she replied, securing it within her dress pocket close to her heart, "of considerable value to those who understand its significance." Her stepbrother snorted dismissively. "Plants and dirt, hardly suitable occupations for a gentlewoman. Thank Providence we've extracted you from that peculiar household. Father will arrange a proper position for you once Emmeline's situation stabilizes." Marian made no reply, her gaze fixed on Arundale's receding facade, where two figures remained watching, the dowager leaning on her silver cane, and the Duke standing tall beside her, his hand raised in a final salute. 3 days after her return to Locksley Manor, Marian understood precisely why George had been dispatched to retrieve her so urgently. Emmeline's situation proved far more dire than initially represented, not merely a broken engagement, but a potential scandal of ruinous proportion. The previous fiancé had left her with more than a broken heart. She now carried his child, a fact she had confessed to their stepmother in a moment of hysterical despair. The household existed in a state of barely controlled panic. Lord Locksley, confined to his chamber with gout, issued increasingly desperate orders for Emmeline's immediate marriage to Sir William Blackwood, while Lady Locksley administered laudanum to keep the distraught girl compliant. The proposed groom, a wealthy widower of 60 with failing eyesight and an obsession with producing an heir, remained blissfully ignorant of his bride's condition. "You must make her understand reason," Lady Locksley insisted, cornering Marian in the morning room. "She listens to you despite your peculiarities. Convince her this marriage represents her only salvation." Marian regarded her stepmother with newfound clarity. "And when the child arrives prematurely yet fully developed, what explanation will satisfy Sir William then?" "A tendency to early births runs in his mother's family," replied Lady Locksley without hesitation. "I have already planted this seed in conversation. The old fool is so desperate for lineage, he will accept any healthy child as his miracle." The callous calculation horrified Marian. "You would build Emmeline's future on such deception." "I would secure this family's standing by any means necessary," her stepmother hissed. "Your sister's foolishness has endangered everything your father has built. If her reputation falls, so do all of ours, including yours, my dear. What respectable household would employ a ruined family's spinster daughter, then?" The threat, so similar to George's, struck with calculated precision, yet Marian found herself strangely unmoved. The envelope from the Duke rested in her desk drawer, containing not merely a generous bank draft, but the promised offer of permanent employment at Arundale. She had options her family could neither control nor revoke. That night, she visited Emmeline's chamber, finding her sister lying listlessly among rumpled bedclothes, her golden curls tangled and dull, her celebrated beauty dimmed by constant weeping. "Have you come to lecture me as well?" Emmeline asked bitterly. "To remind me of my duty and shame?" "No." Marian sat beside her on the bed, taking her sister's cold hand between her own. "I've come to ask what you truly want." Emmeline stared at her in confusion. "What I want? What does that matter now?" "It matters entirely." Marian squeezed her hand gently. "This is your life, Emmeline. Your child. Your future. What do you want for them?" For the first time, someone had asked the question no one else dared voice. Emmeline's carefully constructed facade crumbled entirely, weeks of suppressed emotion pouring forth in gut-wrenching sobs. When the storm finally subsided, she whispered her truth. "I want to keep my baby. I want to raise it with love, not shame. I want freedom from this prison of appearances." Marian nodded, a plan already forming in her mind. "Then we shall secure it." 2 weeks later, as spring unfurled across the English countryside, a hired carriage departed Locksley Manor in the pre-dawn hours. Inside sat 2 women, one slender and serene, the other bundled in multiple cloaks despite the mild weather, accompanied by a small trunk of possessions. Marian watched the familiar landscapes pass for the final time, the lilac ribbon at her wrist, a reminder of all that had brought her to this moment of decisive action. Beside her, Emmeline dozed fitfully, exhausted by the secret preparations for their escape. The plan had come together with surprising ease once Marian accessed the resources provided by the Duke's generous compensation. A modest cottage near the sea, leased under a respectable widow's name. Arrangements for a local midwife of discreet reputation. Sufficient funds to establish a small but comfortable household, while Marian's botanical knowledge secured additional income through partnerships with local nurseries. They would become Mrs. Marsh and her widowed sister, a fiction that would allow Emmeline's child to grow without the stain of illegitimacy. The story of their departure, left in a letter for their father, spoke of Emmeline entering a European convent to recover from heartbreak, accompanied by her plain, dutiful sister as companion. By the time the deception was discovered, they would be well established in their new lives, beyond the reach of family manipulation. As the carriage crested a hill, Marian caught sight of a distant estate whose architectural features reminded her fleetingly of Arundel. Her hand moved instinctively to the seed packet she now wore in a small pouch around her neck, the Duke's parting gift and symbolic blessing. She had written to him just once since her departure, a carefully composed letter accepting his offer of permanent employment, but with one significant modification. She would require a year's postponement to attend to personal matters of pressing importance. His response had arrived with remarkable speed. "Miss Locksley, your terms are accepted without reservation. Some seeds require specific conditions before germination can occur, and I sense you now nurture growth beyond mere botany. Arundel awaits your return when circumstances permit. The Black Orchid project proceeds promisingly, first blooms expected by autumn. A position of significance remains yours to claim whenever you choose to occupy it. With highest esteem, Alaric Vale." The letter, like the seed packet, remained close to her heart. A promise of future possibility once present, obligations reached their natural conclusion. "Where are we?" Emmeline murmured, stirring from her uneasy slumber. "On the road to Dover," Marian replied, squeezing her sister's hand reassuringly, "and beyond that to whatever we choose to make of our lives." For the first time in her memory, Marian Locksley moved forward not as the plain sister, but as a woman of purpose and agency, one who had discovered, among the cultivated gardens of Arundel, the wild and unstoppable strength of her own blooming. In the shadows of judgment we often become what others name us, the plain sister, the forgotten one, the practical mind without beauty. We accept these labels as truth, dimming our light to fit within the narrow frames others have constructed for us. Yet true flowering requires not the validation of those who cannot see beyond surface, but the courage to recognize our own dormant worth. Like Marian's precious orchids, some souls bloom most magnificently, not when forced into artificial display, but when granted the perfect conditions of respect, purpose, and genuine appreciation. The greatest tragedy is not being overlooked by others, but failing to recognize the extraordinary capacity within ourselves. For it is in claiming our unique gifts, however unconventional, however overlooked, that we finally emerge from the shadow of comparison into the light of authentic living. Remember that the most profound transformations often begin in moments of being truly seen, not for the role we play in others' stories, but for the singular melody our own heart composes. And sometimes, the journey to discovering our worth requires leaving behind those who never learned to value it. Did Marian's journey from invisible sister to woman of purpose touch your heart? Has the Duke's recognition of worth beyond beauty resonated with your own experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know which character spoke most deeply to your soul. If this Victorian tale of inner beauty and redemptive love stirred something within you, please subscribe to my channel for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary strength of overlooked hearts. Each week, we explore new journeys of transformation, where those deemed plain by the world reveal the remarkable beauty of authentic spirit. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story of courage, dignity, and love that sees beyond surface to the true worth within. Your support allows these meaningful narratives to continue blooming, just like Marian's precious black orchids.